Hello everyone, it is Professor G. This is video 1 in a 2-video series on quoting. In this video, I want to talk about why it is important that we work on quoting correctly. I think that when we think about using quotes in a paper, we move on to the how, right? The kind of nitty gritty of how to do it, how to actually practice it too quickly. So in this video, I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about why it's important. In other words, who cares if we can work a quote into a paper? And this is going to be my argument. And you don't have to totally buy it, you don't have to believe me, but my argument is this. In practicing quoting, we are working on the most important skill of the 21st century. And people kind of argue about what that most important skill is. But for me, the most important skill to have right now is listening to another person, right? Listening to them sympathetically and really trying to understand where they're coming from. So for me, anytime we practice how to quote in a paper, that is what we are working on, the major skill. And I really recommend that we rethink, if we need to, quoting in this way. Anytime we include someone else's words in our paper, what we are doing is we are momentarily letting them enter the conversation so that we can contribute, right? So imagine that you are having a conversation with another person, right? When you talk to them, you structure your words, and you do this by instinct. You structure your words to allow for a response, right? So you can talk to them, they can talk to you, you can go back and forth. It's a kind of interaction. Anytime you say something to another person, what you are doing is you are entrusting them with your words, with your language, and you are hoping that they will take them as they are, that they will listen to them, that they will understand them and do the work in understanding them. If they don't do that, right? And we do this as humans all the time, we walk away, right? We don't feel listened to. So, I would actually argue that that kind of metaphor, right? Thinking about quoting as having a conversation with another person really helps us think about what not to do. So imagine that you are talking to someone. Doesn't matter who. It can be a friend, it can be a family member, anyone. All right, you talk to them. So again, you entrust them with your language. So now think about what would violate that trust, what the other person could do to turn you away. All right, so one thing that they can do is if you say something to them, if they said the exact same thing, right? If they just repeated it to you or said it in slightly different words and then passed it off as their own idea, right? So you feel violated because that person has taken your idea and stolen it, right? Has now presented it in their own way. All right, so in paper form, this happens all the time. So if you have a quote and then suddenly you just quickly paraphrase it, move on to something different, right? Don't give your own contribution, right? That feels like you are violating the trust of the person who presented the idea, right? Any follow-up to a quote should have the writer's own spin, own contribution, all right? Another way of violating someone's words when they talk to you is to move on to something else. All right, so if I were talking to you on the other side of the screen right now, and I said to you, I had a really tough day this morning. I had a really tough morning. All right, that's my contribution. That's what I want to tell you. If you responded to me by saying, I think the Yankees are the greatest team in baseball, I would feel violated because you're not listening to me. You're not working my words into your response. All right. This in papers happens all of the time. It is so common, right? It is actually called a hit and run quotation. So if you write a paper, all right, and you have a paragraph, you drop a quote in there, and the sentence after that quote is about something else. So it might say something like, elsewhere in the story, blank. So it immediately moves away from the quotation. If you do that, you are violating the trust given to you in the words of the quote. So any follow-up needs to deal with that quote. Otherwise, you are violating the person's language, the person's words. Another way that we feel violated, and this is the third way of feeling violated, is if the other person misunderstands our words, right? So misinterprets them. And that means, giving or a certain intention to the language that isn't actually there, right? If you say something to another person and they misunderstand you, they make it clear that they are not listening to you, right? That they're caught up in their own world and their own thing, and they're not actually thinking about the words you've given to them. So it violates your trust. Anytime in a paper that we have a quote dropped in there and then we willfully misunderstand them, we try to make them fit into our own thing, sometimes violently and forcefully, we are violating the quote. We are violating the words that have been given to us by another person. All right, and then another way of violating someone else's language is to immediately relate it to ourselves, to our own experiences. You might have had this happen to you all the time. So imagine, and I used this example before, so I'm going to stick to it. Imagine imagine I say to you, I had a really tough morning. And your response is immediately, I had a really tough morning 2 years ago. My day was tougher than yours. If that happens, you feel immediately violated, right? Because the person hasn't done the work in showing that they are listening to you and they are thinking about your own words. So those are 4 ways of violating the words of another person. So again, one is simply repeating it back to them, right? Not adding anything, not contributing anything. The second one is moving on to something else immediately, right? That makes us feel violated, like we are not being listened to. The third way of violating someone else's words is to just misunderstand them, right? To give them a meaning that isn't actually there, that isn't actually loyal to the words of the person. And then the fourth violation is immediately jumping to our own experiences. We can use our experiences, that's a way of sympathizing, but we want to start off not with that. We want to start off really proving that we are listening to the other person. And that is the idea I'm going to end with. When you quote in a paper, your burden, your job is to prove that you are listening, really listening to that quote. In the same way that if you were talking to another person, right, whether it's a stranger, someone you just met, or a close and personal friend, regardless, you want to prove regularly that you are listening to their own words. And in some ways, all a quote is, right, in a paper, is a way of documenting our ability to listen and contribute in a conversation. That's what we're working on, having that kind of back and forth. All right, so that is the end of video 1 in the series. In the next video, I'll talk in a little bit more of a practical way about how we can use a quote.